Welcome to the Citizen podcast. I'm Chrisella Herzog.
And I'm Zachary Stickney.
And we are your hosts. So in this month's miniseries, we are diving into Iran, specifically human rights in Iran and how those human rights are affected by technology. When we were outlining the Citizen podcast, we found that Zach and I connected early on over Iran issues. We both have a background in studying and working with Iran issues. And about this time when we were outlining things, the Trump administration was discussing pulling out of the Iran deal, which it ultimately eventually did over the course of interviewing people. So, Zach, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background in Iran issues and working with Iran?
Sure. You know, interestingly for me, not only this podcast, but so much of my professional life, even where I am now, studying at the University of Utah and previously working in the nonprofit sector, it all kind of started with Iran in a weird way. So my college experience began around 2009, which was when Iran had one of its most contested election in recent memory. And that was sort of the first time that social media was having a big impact in terms of an election, of democracy, in terms of citizens really sort of taking control of their narratives in a unique way. And that was kind of a disorienting time in itself, just in the sense of, you know, what kind of power is in technology, what kind of power is given to citizens by these sort of things. And what's interesting about it now, of course, is that we've kind of started to see the opposite end of that and see you know, the different ways that elections can be disrupted, democracy can be disrupted, information can, it's more and more difficult to find out what's true and what's sort of just being spun or being presented as propaganda in a sort of way. And so I think Iran was sort of, it's just an area that kind of made sense because you know, just so much of this world that we're dealing with now kind of started with Iran. With you know, they were calling it a Twitter revolution back then, and now we have a fake news world, and it's just an incredibly disorienting thing to be involved in.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting that you say that your career path started with Iran, because I started college a couple years before, and I started out studying political science and later on ended up also adding in Middle Eastern studies to that as well, where I studied Persian and then later on Pashto. And you know, it's so interesting that you said how the Green Revolution in 2009 affected you, because I think I joined Twitter because of that.
Yeah,
you know?
I think that's literally why I joined Twitter as well.
So I guess Twitter has Iran to thank for a lot of users, I guess.
You're welcome, Twitter.
Yeah, and so, and then I started with journalism I actually started at the Diplomatic Courier just as the Arab Spring was happening. And so much of the Arab Spring was influenced by the Iran Revolution, by the Green Revolution. I don't think you would have had the Arab Spring necessarily in that same form without Iran. And so, yeah, I would totally agree that Iran was kind of the first domino to fall in this crazy world that we're in now.
This is so funny because I think we were in DC at the same time.
We might have been.
Because I was doing an internship at that time throughout the early parts of the Arab Spring with the Middle East Policy Council.
Oh, fascinating. Oh my gosh.
And they do some phenomenal work. And actually the apartment that I was living in was like right down the street.
Oh, where?
From the Egyptian consulate.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And so I remember just kind of, you know, I would get home and I brought my Xbox, and so I would have something to do after work. And I was sitting there just like playing games, and then like all of a sudden there's just these chants and all these people marching right past.
Oh wow.
And I like turn everything off and go out there and kind of like see what's going on, you know. It was like a really just surreal and kind of exciting time to be in DC.
That is fascinating.
Did you have any like similar experiences like that?
I'll be honest, I don't remember.
Yeah.
I really don't remember. I know that I honestly went to so many marches in DC. I
Right.
don't remember anymore. So, but anyway, yeah, that's just fascinating how Iran kind of set us both off on these different paths. So, yeah, and now today, like Iran is still so important to everything that's going on in the world. You know, there's the Iran deal that the U.S. has pulled out of, the JCPOA. So there's this tension now between the countries that are still a part of it and the U.S. that's kind of affecting international relations, affecting, you know, what Iran is going to be, what their role is going to be in the world. And recently there were headlines about how Iran is now trying to emulate Russia in some of their social media disinformation tactics, which I would say was happening before Russia or before this, you know, everybody started noticing, but you know,
it's in our face like never
right
before.
Everybody notices it now. So
yeah. And so I think that's a good segue into who are we talking to. The first person we interview is Amir Soltani, the author of the graphic novel Zahra's Paradise, which is all about what happened in 2009. It's sort of a historical fiction graphic novel in the sense that what happens in the novel itself isn't a real story, but it's drawn from all kinds of news that we saw coming out of Iran at that time, everything from the death of Neda Aga Sultan and bloggers who are being imprisoned. And so Amir, I think, is a good way to start for people who are just completely new to what's going on in Iran. He sort of lays a really good sort of historical perspective of what's happened not only back then, but a little bit before and even up till now, and sort of lays just the groundwork for where we're planning to go in this series. And following Amir Soltani, we have one other friend of mine and former colleague that I used to work with. His name is Reza Ghazinori at United for Iran. He's the program manager there. And I worked with him for a little bit over 3 years, I believe. And what's kind of interesting about United for Iran is that when I first started working there and even volunteering with them when they were created after those 2009 protests, they were very much a sort of traditional human rights organization in the sense that they would do things like organize protests on behalf of political prisoners, you know, sign and create petitions that they would distribute to, you know, various people in power who had the ability to kind of make a difference on whatever they were working on. But toward the end of the time that I was working there, and Reza was a huge part of this, they started to shift in a big way. And this is where that intersection between human rights and technology comes into play, because they started creating some really unique apps to help democratic activists and really just civil society practitioners within Iran. And the final episode in this series, we'll be talking with the journalist Holly Dagris, who creates and curates the Iranist newsletter. She's a really talented expert on Iran and the Middle East in general. Holly also recently joined the Atlantic Council to continue her research on all things Iran.
So what we're going to be talking to Amir, Reza, and Holly about in this series is really what life is like for Iranians on the ground in Iran, as well as around the world, people who have had to leave Iran because their activism has put them in danger, and to kind of get these stories up close of what it's like to be using technology as a human rights activist, and how technology and Iran's technology policies are affecting human rights in the country itself. So one of the reasons we wanted to focus on Iran in the first place is because we both kind of felt that in American media, that there is this tendency to just look at Iran issues at very high level, just coming from the government, and as far as relations between the United States and Iran. You don't really hear a lot of stories of what it's like for Iranians on the ground. So I think a lot of Americans get kind of this stereotype of what it's like to be an Iranian living in Iran. It's not all, you know, death to the U.S. all the time chanting. You're not, you know, these are real people, and we wanted to hear these real stories from people. We have some great interviews coming up, so don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Dot Citizen anywhere you listen to podcasts already, iTunes, Google, Stitcher, wherever. You can also visit us on Twitter at @CitizenPod, where we hope that you will give us your feedback, give us your reaction to these episodes going forward. We really want to hear from you, and we will be reading some of your reactions and some of your messages to us on the air. So we can't wait to hear from you.